Welcome back to another episode of Better Than I Found It, the podcast all things college golf. You're listening to Mike McGraw, the men's golf coach at Baylor University. In a busy spring season, coaches are all coaching their golf teams. Tour players are playing on tour and competing in events week after week. And on that note, I've lately been doing some work out of my Stuff That Works journals, and I've got a few excerpts from that today. But recently I was asked a question from someone who said, "Hey, Coach McGraw, what's the biggest difference between your average player through the years and those who have made it in professional golf?" And I thought about the question for a moment, like, what are the markers? What are the characteristics? What are the things, the traits that these players that have actually played professional golf, either won on the tour or at least played the PGA Tour, have in common? And are there common threads? And it got me to thinking that some of these former players made it in pro golf for different reasons. But I've always said, when I talk to a young player, I said, it's all the players that make it in professional golf. If you looked inside their DNA, like you just cut them open and opened them up and looked inside, their DNA says, "I'm a golfer. That's what I am. I'm a golfer. I don't know really anything else." And they also dream big. It's like they, from day one, believed they were going to play. Now, you heard that often. I always dreamed about playing the PGA Tour, and I dreamed the same thing back in the 1970s, that I was going to play the PGA Tour. It didn't work out for me, and for a lot of the reasons that I'm going to explain in this podcast. But they all dreamed big. They all believed that they were going to play the PGA Tour at some point. It was just a given. But in their DNA, I'm a golfer. All of these people absolutely had a love and a passion for the game of golf. And they had to, because inevitably there's going to be some lows. There's going to be some storms coming your way. There's going to be something just like life. It's going to come your way. And if you don't love the game of golf, you're probably not going to be able to survive any or all of those storms that are headed your way. And that leads to a characteristic of perseverance. I think they've all had to been able to persevere through highs and lows, but certainly just keep on plugging along when the game keeps on slapping you around. And it's not easy playing professional golf. Everyone thinks it's such a glorious, wonderful thing. It's a dream they had, and it's what they wanted to do, but they have to persevere through some pretty tough times. And that also leads to another characteristic of just general toughness. If you're not very tough, the game will slap you around, the opponents will slap you around, life will slap you around, and before you know it, you're not playing professional golf anymore. That's what happened to me. Their work ethic was usually great. Their discipline was awesome. Their grit, fight, and determination to succeed, always at a very high level. But one of the other characteristics was that generally they did not have a backup plan. Now, at Baylor, when Zach Heffernan graduates, hopefully in another 2 months, we will have graduated every player for 11 years. So I'm not saying don't get your degree. The good majority, almost all of the players I've coached through the years have gotten their degree at their university, wherever I was, be it Oklahoma State, Alabama, or here at Baylor. But the no backup plan was that they didn't consider doing anything else for a living. It's what they were going to be. They were going to be a professional golfer. So the backup plan, a lot of guys will say, well, I'll try professional golf for 2 or 3 years. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll go and be a businessman, or I'll be an accountant, or I'll be whatever. And you can't go into professional golf thinking, well, I'll just play it for a while. And then, when and if the time comes where I don't think I can play anymore, I'll do something else. When I say no backup plan, meaning they never considered that. They didn't consider not being a professional. And I think that's one characteristic or one trait that all of the players that I've coached that ended up playing professional golf believed. It's just like, okay, I don't know what the path is going to look like. I'm not certain of the journey. I don't know how many victories I'm going to have along the way. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I'm going to be a professional golfer one day. It got me to thinking also about a team meeting we had in the spring of 2005. And I've written about this in my book, Better Than I Found It. And the person that was involved was a young man from Midwest City, Oklahoma, named Dayton Rose. Dayton had taken golf lessons from me when I was an assistant golf pro, high school coach in Edmond, Oklahoma. He would drive over from Midwest City. His dad, Maury, would bring him. And I gave him lessons. Well, I eventually went to Oklahoma State, and I recruited him as the assistant coach at Oklahoma State to get him to Oklahoma State. And Mike Holder thought he would be a good player. And Dayton was actually a very good player. He was a state high school champion in Oklahoma, but he had won, I think he had made match play in both U.S. juniors he played in. He, in college, made match play in 3 straight U.S. amateurs, made the quarterfinals one year. He finished runner-up to Ryan Moore in the U.S. Public Links one year, and he finished the following year, I think, runner-up to Brant Snedeker in the U.S. Public Links. So he had a great amount of success. He was definitely a good player. But Dayton would often, sort of have bouts of lacks of motivation, if you will, and probably didn't work as hard as he should have. And he self-admittedly, he would tell you he did not work as hard as he needed to work to make the golf team or make a difference on the golf team at Oklahoma State. But anyway, we're having this last team meeting, spring of 2005, and I actually wasn't in this meeting because I was the women's head coach that spring, but I coached Dayton his first 3 years at Oklahoma State. And so as many coaches do in team meetings, when you're trying to motivate guys, you might ask them, okay, how many of you really think you're going to play the PGA Tour one day? And so Mike, I don't know why he was asking this question, but it was the final meeting for Dayton. He was not going to be playing in the conference championship the next week at Whispering Pines. He would be graduating in 2 more weeks, so his career at Oklahoma State was going to be over. But Mike asked the question. He said, how many of you think you're going to play the PGA Tour? And all of them raised their hand, every single player. In that room was Alex Noren. In that room, there were some really good players in that room, and they were ranked number 1 in the country at the time. They all raised their hand, including Dayton. And Mike looked across the table in front of Dayton and all of his teammates, and he said, Dayton, I think you're lying to me right now, and I think you're lying to yourself. And Dayton said, excuse me, coach? He said, Dayton, anybody that's taken care of his business the way you have the last 4 years has no business playing professional golf. You should save your money, and you should take this degree that you're earning at Oklahoma State. You're going to have a degree in 2 or 3 weeks. Take that degree and go make a living with it, but you're not going to be a professional golfer. And there was silence in the room. I wasn't there, but I've heard people talk about it, and I've heard Dayton talk about it, and I actually wrote about it in my book, as I said. But Dayton was gutted for a couple of days. I mean, Mike told him the truth, and it was hard to hear, and Dayton did not want to hear it. But Dayton told me later, and I wrote about this, and that's probably the turning point. Coach Holder made me realize, I really don't expect that I'm going to be playing professional golf. And it changed everything for me. But the point with that story is not to disparage Dayton. He's a wonderful guy, great father, really super dude. You'd love Dayton if you ever met him. But he's not playing professional golf, and professional golf isn't for everybody. And I think Dayton realized that for the first time. But it also reminded me of a Nick Saban quote that I wrote down because I thought it was really, really impactful. And the question that someone had asked Nick was, is being great natural? And his quote was, it's not human nature to be great. It's human nature just to survive, to be average, to do what you have to just to get by. That is normal. When you have something good happen, it's the special people that can stay focused and keep paying attention to detail, working to get better, and not being satisfied with what they've accomplished. So being great, playing the PGA Tour, winning on the PGA Tour, being one of the elite players in the world, it's not natural. It's not normal. It's not what it's what a lot of people may aspire to, and it's what a lot of people give lip service to, that's what they want to do. And honestly, I worked hard as a young man. I thought I was going to play the tour. I had no idea what I was doing. I probably outworked any or most of the players I was playing against, but I didn't know what I was doing, and I truly didn't believe a lot of the things that I'm getting ready to tell you, and a lot of the things that coaches told me about their great players who went on to play the PGA Tour. I wish I had known what I know now back then. Might have handled it a little bit differently, who knows, but I also might not have gotten into this life of coaching. who knows? But I was thinking about some things that lead to playing professional golf. And it brought me to a quote from David Duval. Now, David was obviously a great player in college, great amateur golfer. He was a great professional golfer, and one of the few players who was actually able to reach world number one in Tiger's best years. And David once said, know what you can do and know what you can't do, and never try to do what you can't do. And a lot of people would say that's very limiting, but actually it's freeing, because if I know what I can do, I do that as well as I possibly can. And that got me to making a list here of players who had to do that in order to play professional golf. Now, in the modern day, it's obviously a game of strength and explosiveness and power, and guys are hitting it further now than they've ever hit it. And it's very difficult to not be a long player and make it in the game of golf. But a short player will never overpower a golf course. And so, to David Duval's point, you have to know what you can do, know what you can't do, and don't try to do what you cannot do. But the list of players, I just made a quick list this morning: Corey Pavin, Scott Verplank, Zach Johnson, Jim Furyk, Jeff Sluman, David Edwards, Calvin Peete, David Toms. I mean, there's many, many players from years and years ago, and also from recent years, that have played great professional golf, but they had to maximize what they did. They had to know what they could do, and they did that very well. And that's one of the players I had at Baylor, Kyle Jones. He was my first All-American at Baylor. He was a second-team All-American my first year, Arnold Palmer Cupper, and actually went on to get his Korn Ferry card and then PGA Tour card for 1 year, and then he played the Korn Ferry Tour another 6 or 7 years. He won on the tour. He won in Utah in 2020. But Kyle, and I've told this story on this podcast before, quite a few years ago, that when he was a freshman, he did not hit the ball very far. So he would have been very much like Corey Pavin or Scott Verplank or David Toms or Jeff Sluman. He didn't hit it very far. And he recognized this even on his own team. He was the shortest player at Baylor his freshman year. Whenever he would go to a tournament, and he made most of the tournaments that year, Kyle would realize he was the shortest player in every group he played in. There was no player that he played against in competitive golf that hit it as short as he did. So coming to that realization, Kyle thought, well, I've got to get some more speed. I've got to. He didn't talk about explosiveness or anything like that. He just started swinging as hard as he could. He also started neglecting his short game, and that was one of his great strengths, was his chipping and putting, and just his ability to hit the ball straight, if nothing else. Even though he was short, he was never out of play. And by the end of his very disappointing freshman year, he realized, gosh, I've just abandoned everything that made me good at one time. And so he came up with an idea. And I ran across this idea his senior year during the first day of practice. And that was, he put on a brand new glove that first day of practice, and he took a Sharpie and he signed the glove Kyle Jones on the top. Went about his business and played a practice round that day. And a week later, we were playing the first qualifying round. And he pulled out a brand new glove. The old one had sweated out after 7 days of practice in the August heat. And he signed the glove with a Sharpie again. And I thought, I've just got to ask Kyle, what in the world is he doing there? So after the round, I asked him, and I think he shot 65. Kyle, what are you doing when you sign your gloves? I've never seen a college player, certainly, sign a glove before he put it on. He said, well, Coach, and he told me the story of his freshman year and his desire to get extra yardage and his neglecting of his short game and his abandoning his greatest asset, which is straight driving, all in an effort to try to become a longer driver, just like everybody else was in college golf. And he said, I realized at the end of that year that I'd become a worse player, and I was trying to play everybody else's game. I was trying to play like other people were playing. And he said, I would sign my name on the glove, and I still do it today. So when I looked down at my grip before I was hitting a shot, I would see my name, Kyle Jones. And it reminded me to play Kyle Jones golf and not anybody else's golf. Well, I thought that was brilliant. And as that year went along, the 1 year we got to spend together, his senior year in 2014, 2015. I watched as he dismantled field after field and played great, was an All-American, and just had a great year and ended up on the Arnold Palmer Cup team that year. And when he graduated, he was leaving to go out and play professional golf, and I told him, Kyle, some people have been given a whole lot of talent, a whole lot to work with, but you've done a lot with what you've been given. And I said, I hope you understand that's a compliment. He said, I do, Coach. I understand that's a compliment. And Kyle was able to get his PGA Tour card. He played professional golf for 9 years. He's no longer playing, but his success in pro golf was great. He played the PGA Tour 1 year, and he actually won on the Korn Ferry Tour. And he did that all basically being undersized, didn't hit the ball as far as most competitors he was playing against. But Kyle got to the tour because he knew himself. He knew what he could do. He knew what he couldn't do, and he maximized what he could do. It's actually a superpower if you use it right. A lot of us aren't self-aware enough to be able to do that. Another player that I coached that made the PGA Tour and is still playing today was Ricky Fowler. I've coached him at Oklahoma State for 2 years. When I first met Ricky, he was a motocross. Well, he had just recently quit motocross riding. He was one of the best junior players in the country coming up. Hadn't played a ton of golf on a national level. Most of it had been in the state of California. But when Ricky got on campus, I realized of all of the guys on the team, he probably hit less practice balls during the week than anybody. Now, he would work on things and occasionally did some block practice where he would go out and work on technique or whatever, but always with intentionality. And always, once he figured out what he wanted to do, he would get off the range tee. What Ricky loved to do was play the game. He knew that someday he'd be playing the game for a living, and he wanted to be out on the golf course all the time testing himself. And one other thing he did that was very unusual, and my twin sister Patty did it, was he always, when we played a round of golf, and I played quite a bit of golf with him, but when we played a round of golf, he would always finish out every hole. He didn't just pick up. So he tried to post a score every time he played, which I thought was very unusual, and I thought it was very good. But you see, Ricky was always preparing for a life in professional golf. Though always, I guess when he was a young boy in California, before I knew him, and certainly the 2 years when he was at Oklahoma State, sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. He was always moving toward playing professional golf. He always knew he would one day be a professional golfer. He knew it at the gut level. He also knew he would be able to parlay his style, his fashion style, and his lifestyle into lucrative endorsement contracts, which he's done an amazing job of. He wore his hair long when his contemporaries did not. He wore a white belt when no one else did. He actually got a large OSU belt buckle on his official visit and started wearing that in junior golf tournaments, and that actually spread throughout junior golf and college golf. A bunch of other players did it as well. In college, he often practiced his signature. He wanted something that was legible and also memorable for the fans one day, and he's been one of the great autograph signers maybe in the history of the game, right along with Arnold Palmer. Ricky always signs autographs. But you see, he was always preparing for a life on the PGA Tour. He knew one day he would be out there. And so everything he did was pointing toward that. And I think that's one of the great keys of a lot of players that I've coached that have played professional golf was they pretty much were pointing toward that day when they would play professional golf. It didn't mean that there wasn't going to be some sidetracks. They would get off track occasionally. They would, but always the trajectory was toward the PGA Tour. Another player that I had here at Baylor is Cooper Dossey, who's currently on the Korn Ferry Tour. Cooper was a 2-time All-American at Baylor. He was on the Arnold Palmer Cup team. He did something quite unusual, actually. In a 6-month period, on 2 actual sanctioned tours, he shot in the 50s twice. He shot 59 at the PGA Tour qualifying, I think second stage that year. And within 6 months later, he had shot 58 on the APT Tour. So Cooper's obviously got the propensity to go low at times. His hands are so good. He's got such amazing hands around the green. I nicknamed him Sevi. I always thought he reminded me of Sevi Ballesteros. He could do anything around the greens. But what I loved about Cooper was his self-awareness. And I think that's the reason Cooper's going to make it as a professional golfer. He's very self-aware who he is, and what he's doing. He was always painfully honest with himself and not defensive when I was trying to coach him. And one of the things he told me in a meeting one time was, Coach, sometimes I lack motivation to get to work. And I'm kind of lazy, and I hate that about myself, but I also love being lazy. I think some people would say, well, that's not good, is it? Well, actually, it's actually okay, because he knows that's a weakness of his. He's very self-aware. He's painfully honest with himself, and he does something about it. And I know that's benefiting him in pro golf, but the fact that he was never defensive about it, when I would call him out, when I would sit him down and talk to him, Cooper, you've got to get this figured out. You've got to get this going. And he would always turn it. He's benefiting him today as a professional golfer. Johnny Kiefer, who's currently also on the Korn Ferry Tour. I think Johnny is 10th on the Korn Ferry list this year. He's the only 3-time All-American at Baylor. He was on the Arnold Palmer Cup team one year. But when I first met Johnny Kiefer, he was a lacrosse player. So he was a golfer, a kid just playing in golf tournaments who happened, his first sport was lacrosse. So I knew he was athletic, knew he could do that. And when he first came on an unofficial visit, I told him, I said, Johnny, I think you're a PGA Tour player. I think you're an All-American. That's where I think you're headed. And I think on some level he always believed that. And so even though he wasn't perfect for 5 years at Baylor, he was always pointing toward that. And his senior year, his 5th year, which was the 23-24 school year, he started the year somewhere in the 25th range as far as PGA Tour University. And so his goal was to obviously get one of those spots so he could go from the national championship last May at La Costa straight into professional golf. And as the spring season started, he was still around 25th, but he had 3 really just tough tournaments in a row. And I think he was probably thinking too much about that, trying to get that spot. And he fell to somewhere around the 35th range. But anyway, long story short, he played really well at conference. He played really well at regionals. And we did the math. And if he'd finished in the top 10, so 10th place at the NCAA championship at La Costa, he would actually get one of the PGA Tour University. He'd get to number 25 and had a decent tournament, actually a good tournament, and finished 11th at La Costa. So it was sort of disappointing because even though he was an All-American and all of that, it didn't look like he was going to get the spot. And so Johnny and his parents, Luke Dossie and his parents, and Tyler Eisenhart and his parents, those were my 3 fifth-year seniors that were at the national championship. We all went out to dinner that night after the final round of the NCAA. We had missed match play. I think we finished 14th as a team. And I had my phone there, and I got a tweet that said, congratulations to this year's PGA Tour University Top 25. And I looked at it, and Johnny's name was at 25. I thought, wow, we must have not done the math correctly. And so I put the phone across the table and handed it to Johnny, and I said, Johnny, look at this. And he saw his name as 25th on the list, and he got this big smile, grin, ear to ear, and he said, oh my gosh, I've got a job. And so it immediately changed his mind, because before that dinner, all he knew was he was going to do Monday qualifiers, all summer APT events, but he wasn't going to have status, so he was going to have to kind of piecemeal his schedule for the whole summer. He didn't really have a schedule as he led up to the Korn Ferry Tour School. And he got this big smile on his face. And what I think about Johnny is one of the great things that guys that end up playing the PGA Tour do is they learn to seize opportunity. And for him, this was an amazing opportunity he had right there, and he knew it. And what he did on that PGA Tour Americas Tour, even though he had missed the first 6 tournaments of the season because we were playing college golf, he played in 11 of those events, all 11 that were available to him. I think he had 8 top 5 finishes and a 6th place finish. He won an event, and he won the tour. He was number 1 on that tour, which got him his Korn Ferry card for this year. He also went to tour school and tried to improve his status. But But that finish got him an exemption into the Napa PGA Tour event last fall, where he finished 13th. Once again, taking advantage and seizing opportunity that was afforded him. And, he's playing really, really well this year on the Korn Ferry Tour. The future remains to be seen, but I think this kid's got what it takes. And I think the same thing about Cooper Dossie. Both of these guys, for the reasons I've just described, are probably going to make it in pro golf. There's no guarantees, but those are a couple of 2 or 3 players of mine that, I don't know, it seems like to me would have different characteristics, and that's why they stood out from among their peers at Baylor. I decided to ask some of the best coaches in college golf the same question that was asked me. What was different about the players you've had that have played the PGA Tour, gone on to play the PGA Tour, or won on the PGA Tour, or won majors, in the world of professional golf? And I think all of these guys are going to be names you're going to recognize. And although they don't all mention specific players too much, they definitely they definitely give characteristics and traits of why those players were different. I will start with one that I did ask, and this is John Fields. John was team when I did these questions for these coaches. He was competing at the time. I think they were playing in the John Haidt tournament in Florida. But it reminded me of a quote that John gave me for this podcast, in fact, several years ago. And he said that, and by the way, I think John is one of the only coaches ever who's coached 2 future world number ones. He coached Jordan Spieth and Scotty Scheffler at Texas. But John told me about Jordan Spieth. He said, on this Better Than I Found a podcast, he said, the reason Jordan was so great was that he had delusional confidence. His 2011 and 2012 team fed off of this confidence and won the NCAA championship. John was having dinner with Jordan in Austin just a week following his first failed attempt at the tour school. So this is Jordan who's gone to tour school and did not make it. He shot, I think, finished T26th in that qualifying. And Jordan asked if there was anything that he could do for Coach Fields. And Coach Fields told him that whenever he played in the Ryder Cup one day, that he would like him and his wife Pearl to be there to support him. And Jordan said, well, you'll both be with my guest at Glen Eagles in 2 years. Now, bear in mind, Jordan had just finished T26 and failed to get his PGA Tour card. And I'm thinking to myself, when John's telling me this, here's a kid who doesn't have any status. He doesn't have his tour card. He's not on the top of the world. He's already telling John Fields and his wife Pearl, you will be at the Ryder Cup as my guest at Glen Eagles. And I think John was saying this delusional confidence meant it's like he has no reason to believe that other than it's what he believes is going to happen. He truly did. And I think that is something, even though all players have doubts, no player, including Tiger Woods, Jack Nicklaus, Ben Hogan, none of them have gone without doubt. They've all just learned to overcome those fears. And I'm going to talk about fear here in a minute, but I think Jordan has it. I hope it's something that never leaves him. He's playing well again right now, but I think that's what got him to the PGA Tour, and John Fields knows him. I asked Mike Small, the coach at the University of Illinois, who's done an amazing job at Illinois over the last 15 to 20 years. It's actually been quite unprecedented for a Midwest Northern school to do what they've done. But I asked John, what was the difference? I asked him that same question. He said, well, my best players had an ability to combine exceptional talent with mental and emotional maturity and a deep-seated belief and a high level of self-confidence. A high level of self-awareness is strong and consistent so that no high-pressure moment is too big for them. Things slow down when things speed up for normal or average players. So high level of self-confidence, mental and emotional maturity, and when the world is crashing down around their players, it slows down for them where it speeds up for the average player. And by the way, one of his former players, Brian Campbell, just won on the PGA Tour a couple of weeks ago. I asked the same question to Alan Bratton. His was short and sweet, but he said they all possessed a passion and a love for the game, and they also had a confidence to be coached. And I think that is key, that you've got enough self-belief that you're okay with taking coaching. Michael Jordan probably was the best of it. He was one of the great learners or great students of the game. He loved being coached. And so Alan's saying they've got the confidence, the self-belief to know that being coached is a good thing. It'll help me be a better player. Ryan Hybl at the University of Oklahoma, I asked him the same question. He said, all my best players who went on to play professional golf were able to stay on the good side of momentum. They were able to get more out of their games than what meets the eye. I also feel like my best players loved competition of playing more than practicing. Ryan has done one of the great jobs in college golf for sure over the last 15 years. And part of that is getting players who he just described right there, like Max McGreevy, who's playing the PGA Tour. And you would never, when you looked at Max when he was a senior in high school, you wouldn't look at it and think that guy's going to win. One day he's going to be a PGA Tour player. Ryan recognized it. And Max is one of those players who loves competing. He's a competitor. And practicing is a wonderful thing. We all have to do it. But loving the game and loving competing is a huge advantage. Trey Jones at Florida State, whose current player Luke Clanton has already earned a PGA Tour card, and he's coached Brooks Koepka and many others. He said, my best players had a genuine love for golf and for competition. Golf cannot be just work. It has to be a labor of love. Bruce Hepler, who has been one of the great coaches in the history of the game. He's a Hall of Famer, Golf Coaches Association, been at Georgia Tech since 1995. He said, Coach Matt Kuchar and a ton of other great players, my best players learned to deal with growing self-expectations and the expectations others had on them as they got better and better. They learned to handle the expectations and deal with that and grow with that. So Bruce obviously feels that you're trying to get better as players, but once you do get better, how do you handle those expectations? Very, very well said, Bruce. And Chris Hack, he's coached, I think, 13 PGA Tour players or more. 9 of those players have won 3 or more events. Several of them have won multiple majors. It's just been an amazing floodline, if you will, of players to the PGA Tour. Chris says, each one of my best players at some point believed 100% in what they were doing, but they were able to also overcome the inherent fear of hitting a bad shot. They all knew that fear and being nervous is perfectly okay and normal. And one of his players, Russell Henley, just won on the PGA Tour. And if you look at a YouTube video of an interview he did, basically he was saying, the last 2 holes I was extremely nervous. I mean, very nervous. So Chris Hack's players have done a great job of learning to overcome the inherent fear. They have fear that's going to hit every one of us. It reminded me of a quote from Hal Sutton. He said, another little piece of advice for parents. Kids don't know fear on the golf course when they start. We as adults introduce them to it. As they advance, let them make mistakes that look like it's too risky for you. Playing golf without fear is what we all long to do. So even though we're going to be afraid, like Russell Henley was, one of Chris Hack's players was a couple of weeks ago, we've got to learn to deal with that. And I think that's a great quote by Hal Sutton for sure. I think all these coaches, and that's only about 7 or 8 coaches right there that have had players that win on the PGA Tour. But I think all of them understand these are the traits. This is why players end up playing for a living. And I've just literally scratched the surface here. So regardless of where you are in your golf journey, remember that all the players mentioned in this podcast were at one point right where you are, right where you might be today, dreaming of that life on the PGA Tour. But don't be trapped by other people's expectations of you, or believe them when they tell you that making the PGA Tour just isn't realistic. Like my old boss at OSU, Mike Holder, once told me, McGraw, being great at anything has nothing to do with being realistic. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.